I was erased from my own family for my sick sister. When they returned, I made sure they felt the same pain they gave me. I was 6 years old, and my parents told me I was going to visit my grandparents. It sounded exciting at the time because I loved visiting them. Gran always had cookies waiting, and she let me watch cartoons way past when I should have been in bed. My grandpa would take me outside to pick tomatoes in the garden, even though I didn't like tomatoes. I just liked hanging out with him. So when they said I'd be staying there for a little while, I didn't think anything of it. I remember my mom was really quiet that day, quieter than usual. She hugged me before I left, but it didn't feel like her normal hug. It was stiff, kind of forced. My dad was rushing around like he had somewhere else to be. He barely said goodbye when he dropped me off. He didn't even come inside. He just kind of waved as he drove off. At the time, I thought maybe he was just in a hurry. It's funny how little kids don't see the bigger picture. I didn't realize I'd been abandoned. Not yet. At first I kept asking Gran when my parents were coming back. She'd smile and say, "Soon, sweetheart." I think she really believed that at first. I think we all did. But then days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Gran eventually stopped giving me answers. She just looked sad whenever I asked. Grandpa, who was usually so cheerful, started shaking his head and muttering under his breath whenever my parents came up. The real explanation came from my uncle. My uncle is my dad's younger brother, and he's always been the kind of person who tells it like it is, no sugarcoating. I was playing in the backyard when he came over one day. He sat me down on the swing set and told me as gently as he could that my parents weren't coming back, not for a while anyway. "They think it's best for you to stay here," he said. I didn't understand. Why would it be best for me to stay here? Why weren't they coming back? He tried to explain that my sister was sick and that my parents needed to focus on taking care of her. Even at 6, I knew that didn't feel right. Why couldn't they take care of both of us? Why couldn't I go back home? He didn't have answers for that, and I could tell he was mad at my parents, though he didn't say it outright. I remember crying that night. Not just crying but sobbing, like the kind of crying where you can't breathe. Gran sat with me on the couch and rocked me back and forth like I was a baby again. She didn't say much, she just let me cry it out. I think that's when it really hit me that they weren't coming back for me. Life with Gran and Grandpa wasn't bad though. They were loving and kind, and they tried to give me as much stability as they could. But they were also old and tired. I think it was a lot for them to suddenly have a little kid to take care of. That's where my uncle and aunt stepped in. My uncle, who didn't have kids of his own, started coming over more often. At first, he'd just help out, fixing stuff around the house, mowing the lawn, and taking me out to get ice cream when he could tell I needed cheering up. But after a while, it became clear that my grandparents couldn't keep up with me full time. So, my uncle and his wife offered to take me in. I didn't want to leave Gran and Grandpa, but they sat me down one evening and explained that it was for the best. "You'll still see us all the time," Gran promised, and she was right. They only lived a few blocks away from my uncle, so I saw them almost every day. Living with my uncle and aunt was an adjustment at first. I was used to my grandparents' slower pace, and suddenly I was in a house with younger adults who had a completely different vibe. They were stricter in some ways, bedtimes were actually enforced. But they were also more energetic. My uncle would play catch with me in the yard, and my aunt would bake cookies with me and let me decorate them, even though I was terrible at it. I started calling them Mom and Dad when I was around 8. It just kind of happened naturally. They never asked me to. They said I could call them whatever I wanted, but after a while it just felt right. They were the ones who tucked me in at night, helped me with my homework, and came to my school events. The whole time my bio parents were ghosts. I'd call them sometimes, but they wouldn't pick up. I'd send letters but they wouldn't write back. Every now and then Gran would get an update about my sister through one of her church friends, and that was the only way I ever knew what was going on with them. One time, when I was about 8 or 9, they did visit. I don't even remember why. Maybe they felt guilty, or maybe they just wanted to check the box of seeing their son. Whatever the reason, it was awkward. They acted like they didn't know what to say to me, and I didn't know what to say to them either. I was shy around them, like they were strangers, and honestly, that's what they felt like. They didn't stay long. I think the whole visit lasted an hour tops. After they left, my uncle hugged me and said, "You don't need to worry about them. Okay, we've got you." And that's when I decided that he was my real dad. My bio parents might have brought me into the world, but they weren't the ones raising me. Looking back, that drop-off at my grandparents' house was probably the most defining moment of my childhood. It's the moment my life split in two, the life I thought I'd have with my bio parents, and the life I ended up having with my uncle and aunt. I'm grateful for them every single day, but I'd be lying if I said that abandonment didn't leave some scars. By the time I was about 9, I had stopped asking about my bio parents as much, not because I didn't care, I mean, they were my parents, right? But because asking never led to anything. I'd bring them up, and my grandparents would just get quiet. My uncle and aunt, though they tried to stay neutral, couldn't hide their frustration either. I guess I just got tired of the same non-answers. At first I still tried to reach out to them. I'd send letters with little updates about school, like I got a gold star on my spelling test, or we're learning about dinosaurs and T-Rex is my favorite. Looking back, they were probably the kind of things a little kid would think their parents would love to hear. But they never wrote back, not once. I'd sit by the mailbox for days after sending something, hoping maybe this time they'd reply. Eventually, I just stopped waiting. When I was around 10, I had this old flip phone my uncle gave me. It didn't have games or anything cool on it, just basic calling and texting, but I loved it, because it made me feel grown up. I used to call my parents sometimes, thinking maybe they'd pick up if it was their big boy son calling. They didn't, not once. I left voicemails sometimes, but they never called back. One time, I even asked Gran if maybe they'd lost my number or forgot where we lived. She just gave me this sad little smile and said, "Sweetheart, they know how to find you if they want to." I don't know why, but that hit me hard. The idea that they could call or visit anytime they wanted, but just didn't. That was a tough pill to swallow. I think what really made me stop trying was this one visit when I was around 11. It was their first visit in years, and I got so excited when I heard they were coming. I cleaned my room, brushed my hair extra nice, and even put on this stupid button-up shirt my aunt said made me look handsome. When they showed up though, it was like they barely knew me. They acted polite, like how you might act around a CO worker's kid or something, but not like parents. My mom brought me this generic toy truck, and my dad just kind of sat there awkwardly asking questions like, "So how's school?" It felt weird, like they were strangers. I wanted to yell at them, "I'm your son, why don't you know me?" But I didn't. I just sat there and gave short answers until they left. After that, I told my uncle I didn't want to see them anymore. He didn't push me on it, just said, "That's your choice, buddy. We'll support you no matter what." I stopped calling them, stopped writing, and honestly, they didn't even notice. The silence between us wasn't just me cutting them off, it was mutual. By the time I was 12, I decided I was done. No more reaching out, no more waiting for them to show up. I was over it. If they wanted me in their life, they'd have to prove it. Spoiler alert, they didn't. What made it easier to let go was how much my aunt and uncle stepped up. They didn't just take care of me, they parented me. My uncle went to every parent-teacher conference, even the boring ones where the teacher just said he's doing fine. My aunt would stay up late with me when I had a project due the next day, even though I'd procrastinated until the last minute. One summer, they even took me to Disneyland. I didn't really think much about it at the time, but looking back, I realized how much they saved up for that trip. We weren't rich or anything, but they wanted me to have that experience. My uncle even went on Space Mountain with me, even though he hates roller coasters. That's the kind of people they are. Meanwhile, my bio parents were basically ghosts. I didn't hear from them at all after that awkward visit. Gran mentioned them once in a while, like your mom asked how you were doing, but it felt so hollow. If she cared, why didn't she ask me directly? It's not like my phone number changed. The last real update I got about them was when my sister got worse. Gran told me in passing that they'd moved to be closer to a hospital that specialized in her illness. I felt bad for my sister, I really did. But I also felt this resentment bubbling up. They could uproot their whole lives for her, but they couldn't pick up the phone to check on me? I tried not to let it get to me too much. My life with my uncle and aunt was good, stable. They made sure I had everything I needed, and they were always there for me, even when I didn't realize I needed them. I still saw my grandparents all the time, and they always made me feel loved. By the time I was a teenager, I think I'd come to terms with it. My bio parents weren't really my parents anymore. Not in the way that mattered. I started seeing my uncle and aunt as my real parents. They earned that title in every way that counts. What stuck with me though was this underlying sense of being disposable. Like, if my parents could just leave me like that, what did that say about me? Was I not worth fighting for? I didn't talk about those feelings much, but I think my uncle and aunt sensed it. One day, out of the blue, my uncle sat me down and said, "You know you're wanted, right? You're not just here because we had to take you in. We wanted you." I didn't cry in front of him because, teenage boys don't cry, but later that night I did. I think that's when I stopped thinking of myself as the kid my parents left, and started thinking of myself as the kid my uncle and aunt chose. It made all the difference. By the time I was 14, I had settled into my life with my uncle and aunt as my new normal. I wasn't the kid who got left behind anymore, at least not in my day-to-day life. My uncle and aunt never made me feel like a burden. If anything, they treated me like I was the best thing that ever happened to them. One day, I overheard my aunt talking to my gran about how they'd never been able to have kids. She sounded so sad, saying, "We tried everything, but it just wasn't meant to be." I had no idea before that. They never talked about it around me, probably because they didn't want me to feel like some kind of replacement. But after I overheard that conversation, it started to make sense. The way they poured everything they had into raising me wasn't just because they were good people. It was because they really, genuinely wanted to be parents. It hit me differently after that. I mean, I'd always loved them, but realizing how much they'd been through made me appreciate them even more. They weren't just filling in for my bio parents, they chose me. Around this time, we started talking about adoption. My uncle brought it up casually one night after dinner. "How would you feel if we made this official?" he asked. At first, I didn't know what to say. I mean, they already felt like my parents in every way that mattered. Would a piece of paper really change anything? But the more we talked about it, the more it started to feel like a big deal. It wasn't just about legality, it was about belonging. They explained that adopting me wasn't as simple as just signing some forms. There were legal hurdles because my bio parents still had parental rights, even though they'd essentially abandoned me. My uncle said it would be expensive and complicated, but they were willing to go through it if it's what I wanted. I told them I'd think about it, and I did. A lot. I even talked to Gran about it, and she said something that stuck with me. "You already know where your heart belongs, sweetheart. This is just catching the rest of the world up." After a few months, I told my uncle and aunt I wanted to move forward with the adoption. That decision kicked off a long, frustrating process: lawyers, court dates, paperwork. It felt like it would never end. My bio parents didn't contest it, of course. Why would they? It wasn't like they were fighting to keep me. But the system still made it harder than it needed to be. Even with all the hoops we had to jump through, my uncle and aunt were determined to make it happen. I think they wanted it as much as I did, maybe even more. They wanted me to know without a doubt that I was theirs. The adoption finally became official when I turned 18. I remember sitting in the courtroom, hearing the judge declare that my uncle and aunt were now my legal parents. It felt surreal. I'd been waiting for that moment for so long, and when it finally happened, I didn't even know how to react. My uncle hugged me afterward, and I could tell he was holding back tears. "We've always been your family," he said. "This just makes it official." That night, we celebrated with dinner at my favorite pizza place. It wasn't a fancy celebration, but it felt perfect. My aunt kept calling me her miracle kid, and my uncle said, "You were just misrouted by the stork at first, but we found you." Looking back, that moment stands out as one of the happiest days of my life. Not because the adoption changed how we felt about each other, it didn't, but because it erased any lingering doubt I had about where I belonged. The adoption also changed how I thought about my bio parents. For years I'd been carrying this weight of not being wanted, but that day it finally hit me that their rejection didn't define me. My uncle and aunt's love did. I started calling them Mom and Dad full-time after that. It wasn't something we discussed or decided, it just happened naturally. They didn't say anything about it the first time I did, but I saw the way my aunt's face lit up when I said, "Thanks, Mom," as she handed me a plate of food. The adoption also marked the beginning of me fully letting go of my bio parents. Before that, I think a small part of me was still holding out hope that they'd come back, that they'd apologize, that they'd somehow make up for all the years they'd been gone. But after the adoption, I realized I didn't need that anymore. I already had everything I needed. Around this time, I started college. My new parents, it still feels weird calling them that even now, were my biggest cheerleaders. They helped me fill out my FAFSA, drove me to campus tours, and even bought me a new laptop as a graduation gift. When I moved into my dorm, my aunt cried, and my uncle pretended not to. College was a fresh start in a lot of ways. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't know anything about my past. I didn't have to explain why I didn't talk to my bio parents, or why I called my uncle and aunt mom and dad. I could just be me. Of course, I still went home for holidays and long weekends. Every time I walked through the door, my mom, my aunt, but now officially mom, would have cookies waiting, and my dad, my uncle, would ask me about every single detail of my classes. They made sure I knew that no matter where I went or what I did, I always had a place with them. In a weird way, I think being adopted at 18 meant more to me than if it had happened when I was younger. By then, I fully understood what it meant. It wasn't just about being taken in, it was about being chosen. My uncle and aunt didn't just take care of me out of obligation. They went out of their way to make me part of their family. That's something my bio parents never did. I was 20 when my sister passed away. It was late November, right after Thanksgiving. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in years, so hearing the news hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I didn't cry, but it was like a weight settled in my chest that I couldn't shake. Gran was the one who told me. She called one evening and said, "Sweetheart, I need to tell you something. Your sister passed away last night." Her voice was steady, but I could tell she was holding back tears. Gran had always stayed in touch with my bio parents more than I did, mostly because of her church circle. She'd hear updates about my sister through mutual friends, and sometimes she'd pass them on to me. But I never asked for details. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to grieve for her because she was my sister, but the truth is I barely knew her. She was 14 when I was sent away, and by the time I was old enough to really remember her, I'd already been out of the picture for years. The memories I did have were faint, like flashes of moments we shared as kids, playing tag in the yard, her braiding my hair for fun even though I hated it, and her yelling at me for breaking her favorite doll. Those were the memories I clung to when I thought about her. But the reality was she grew up without me, and I grew up without her. Gran told me the funeral would be in 2 weeks. She wasn't pushy, but I could tell she thought I should go. "It might give you some closure," she said softly. I told her I'd think about it. The next week I wrestled with the decision. I didn't want to see my bio parents, but I also felt like not going would be wrong. My sister didn't deserve to be ignored just because I had problems with them. In the end, I decided to go, but I made it clear to my parents through Gran that I didn't want to talk to them. I showed up at the funeral late and slipped into the back row of the church. It was a small service, mostly family, and a few of my sister's friends. My bio parents were in the front, and even from the back, I could see how broken they looked. My mom kept dabbing at her face with a tissue, and my dad just stared straight ahead like he was in a daze. I didn't feel anything when I looked at them, no anger, no sadness, nothing. They were just two people I used to know. The service itself was short and quiet. The pastor talked about my sister's life, her strength, and how much she meant to the people who loved her. I sat there feeling out of place. I didn't belong in that room, surrounded by people who knew her so much better than I did. When the service ended, I slipped out before anyone could stop me. I didn't want to get cornered by my parents or have some awkward conversation with relatives I hadn't seen in years. I just walked to my car and drove away. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. A few days later, my bio parents called my uncle. I guess they wanted to talk to me, but I told him to tell them I wasn't available. I didn't care what they had to say. They'd ignored me for years, and now they suddenly wanted to reconnect? It felt too convenient. Gran wasn't thrilled with my decision. She thought I should at least hear them out, but she didn't push me. She's always respected my boundaries when it comes to them. In the days that followed, I felt this weird mix of emotions. I wasn't sad for my parents. I couldn't be after everything. But I did feel a sense of loss for the relationship I could have had with my sister. She was the one person who might have understood what I went through. And now she was gone. My uncle and aunt were amazing during this time, as they always are. My mom, my aunt, but she's mom to me now, kept checking on me, asking how I was feeling. My dad, my uncle, didn't say much, but he gave me these reassuring pats on the back whenever he saw me. They knew I wasn't grieving in the traditional sense, but they also knew this wasn't easy for me. What surprised me most was how much I thought about my sister after the funeral. I found myself digging through old photo albums, looking for pictures of us as kids. There weren't many, just a handful of us playing in the backyard, or sitting together on Christmas morning. But those few pictures felt precious, like proof that we'd once been a real family, even if it was only for a little while. I also thought a lot about the life she must have had. Gran had told me bits and pieces over the years. My sister was strong, kind, and loved by everyone who knew her. She fought her illness with everything she had, and I respected her for that. But I also couldn't help but wonder if she ever missed me. Did she think about the little brother who got sent away? Did she feel guilty, even though none of it was her fault? I'll never know, and that's the hardest part. In the weeks after the funeral, my bio parents tried to reach out again. They sent a card through Gran, saying they wanted to talk. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready, if I'd ever be ready. The funeral didn't bring me closure, at least not the way Gran had hoped. If anything, it just brought up more questions. But it also solidified something for me. My parents and I were strangers now. They might have given me life, but they weren't my family. My family was the people who stood by me, who raised me, who loved me without conditions. Christmas was always a big deal for my family, not my bio parents. Of course, I'm talking about my uncle, aunt, and grandpa. Ever since I started living with my uncle and aunt, they made Christmas special for me, decorating the tree, baking cookies, blasting Christmas music. It was like something out of a holiday movie. For years, that was my Christmas tradition, and I loved it. This past Christmas felt a little different, though. It was the first one after my sister's funeral, and while I hadn't been close to her, the absence of her presence in the background of my life felt strange. My bio parents had tried to reach out to me a few times since the funeral, but I'd ignored every attempt. I figured they'd get the hint eventually. That night, I went to midnight mass with Gran, which was something we always did together. My aunt and uncle didn't usually come, they weren't really church people, but Gran loved the tradition, and I liked spending that time with her. It was one of those quiet moments where everything feels peaceful, and for a while it felt like the weight of everything that had happened was lifted off my shoulders. That peace didn't last long. About halfway through the service, I felt someone sit down behind us. At first I didn't think much of it, but then I caught a whiff of my mom's perfume. It's funny how smells can trigger memories. For a second, I was a little kid again, sitting on her lap while she read me a story. But that memory was quickly replaced by anger. What were they doing here? I didn't turn around, I didn't want to see them, and I definitely didn't want to talk to them. I focused on the service, but I could feel their presence behind me the entire time. It was like they were trying to bore holes into the back of my head with their stares. When the service ended, I stood up to leave with Gran, but before I could take 2 steps, my mom was in front of me. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly, like we were picking up a conversation we'd had yesterday. I froze for a second. I didn't know what to do. Then without thinking I said, "Sorry, do I know you?" Her face fell. I could see the shock and hurt in her eyes, but I didn't care. I was done pretending everything was okay. My dad stepped forward and said, "We're your parents." I shook my head. "My parents are at home," I said. Then I turned to Gran. "Are you ready to go?" Gran didn't say anything, but she gave me a little nod, and we started walking toward the door. My bio parents followed us, calling after me. "You really don't recognize us?" my mom asked. I stopped and turned around. "Oh, are you my dad's brother?" "I think I remember you from when I was little," I said, pretending to be confused. That was the final straw. My dad's face turned red, and my mom looked like she was about to cry. I felt a twinge of guilt, but it wasn't enough to make me stop. They had years to make this right, and they hadn't. Gran didn't say much on the way home. She just held my hand and squeezed it every now and then. I think she was proud of me for standing my ground, but she also knew how heavy the moment was for me. When we got back to the house, my aunt and uncle were waiting up for us. I told them what happened, and my uncle just shook his head. "They don't get to play the victim now," he said, "not after everything." I went to bed that night feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me felt triumphant, like I'd finally stood up for myself in a way I never had before. But another part of me felt hollow, like maybe I'd crossed a line. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from my bio parents. My aunt handed it to me with a look that said, "You don't have to read this if you don't want to." But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The letter was long and emotional. They talked about how hurt they were by my reaction, how they'd only ever tried to do what was best for me, and how they'd always be my parents no matter what. They asked for forgiveness, saying they wanted to start fresh now that my sister was gone. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. My family was divided on what I should do. Gran thought I was justified in how I handled it. They made their choice a long time ago, she said. Now they have to live with it. Some other relatives, though, thought I was being too harsh. They're grieving, one cousin said. Maybe this is their way of trying to make amends, but to me it felt like too little, too late. Where were they when I was 8 and scared and confused? Where were they at my school plays, my birthdays, my graduation? They had their chance, and they blew it. The thing is, I don't hate them. I don't think I ever could. But I also don't feel like I owe them anything. They made their choice, and I made mine. For now, I'm focusing on the family that's always been there for me, my aunt and uncle, who raised me when my parents wouldn't, and Gran, who never stopped loving me. They're the ones who matter. After Christmas, things went back to normal, or as normal as they could be. I returned to school, buried myself in studying, and tried to push the awkward encounter at midnight mass out of my head. But my bio parents weren't done. About a week into January, another letter arrived. This one wasn't just emotional, it was almost desperate. My aunt handed it to me like she was holding a bomb, her eyes full of concern. "You don't have to read this," she said gently. But I did. I felt like I had to, even if it was just to see what they had to say. The letter was long, several pages handwritten in my mom's neat script. She apologized over and over for what they'd done. She explained that they'd been overwhelmed when my sister got sick and had made decisions they thought were best for everyone, even if those decisions hurt me. She said they'd never meant to abandon me, but they didn't know how to juggle everything at the time. It sounded like excuses to me. They didn't know how to juggle everything? Plenty of families deal with tough situations without throwing one of their kids away like an old toy. The letter went on to talk about my sister's final years, how hard she'd fought, how much she missed me, and how she'd always hoped we could reconnect someday. That part stung. I'd spent so much time being angry at my parents that I never really thought about how my absence might have affected her. But then the tone shifted. My mom started talking about how, now that my sister was gone, they wanted to rebuild our family. She wrote that they loved me and missed me and hoped I'd give them a chance to make things right. The last line hit me the hardest. "No matter what you say or do, you'll always be our son." I put the letter down and stared at it for a long time. Part of me felt like they were trying to manipulate me, using my sister's memory to guilt me into forgiving them. But another part of me wondered if they really meant it. I didn't know what to do. I showed the letter to my uncle and aunt, who read it together in silence. When they finished, my uncle said, "It's your call, kiddo, but whatever you decide, we're here for you." Gran had a different take. They made their bed, and now they want to unmake it because it's uncomfortable, she said. "Don't let them guilt you into anything you're not ready for." The thing was, I wasn't sure what I was ready for. On one hand, I didn't think I could ever forgive them for what they'd done. On the other hand, cutting them off completely hadn't made the hurt go away. For weeks I carried that letter around with me, rereading it whenever I had a spare moment. I tried to imagine what it would look like to have a relationship with them again. Would it be awkward and forced, or could we actually rebuild something meaningful? Eventually, I wrote them a response. It wasn't long, just a couple of paragraphs. I told them I appreciated their apology but wasn't ready to forgive them. I said I needed more time to process everything, and that I'd reach out if and when I was ready to talk. I didn't tell them I loved them. I didn't call them mom or dad, I just signed it with my name. When I sent the letter, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I'd finally said what I needed to say. Sadness because I knew it wasn't the happy ending they were hoping for. A few weeks later, my mom wrote back. Her letter was shorter this time, but the tone was different. It felt less desperate, more understanding. She said she respected my decision and would wait as long as it took for me to be ready. She didn't push or guilt-trip me. She just said she loved me and wanted me to be happy, no matter what that looked like. I haven't responded yet. Maybe I will someday, but for now, I'm focusing on the people who've always been there for me. My aunt and uncle, my real mom and dad, have done more for me than my bio parents ever did. They gave me a home, a family, and a sense of belonging. That's something my bio parents can't take away, no matter how much they try to reconnect. Gran says I handled the situation with more grace than she would have. You're a better person than me, sweetheart, she said with a little laugh. I would have told them where to stick it. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am too soft. But I like to think that setting boundaries while leaving the door open just a crack isn't weakness. It's me taking control of the situation on my own terms. For now, I'm at peace with where things stand. My bio parents might always be a part of my story, but they're not the whole story. The family that raised me loved me and chose me. That's my real family. And that's all I need.